Namaskar. Today we have to study chapter number 12 of class 8th, that is friction. To start this chapter, first of all we try to reason the following events. First event, we are going on our bike or car. To stop that, to slow down that, we apply brakes. After applying brake, it slows down and finally stops. We take another situation. An object is moving on another object, and if there is no net external force, then it finally slows down and stops. Third situation, we fall down when we step on a banana peel. What is the reason of all these events? In this chapter, we will try to find the reasons of all these events. To understand these reasons, we have to do some activities. So let's do our first activity. I move this book in forward direction, and after leaving it, it stops. What should be its reason? Everybody can think that there should be a force in the direction opposite to its motion. Let us move it again in opposite direction. Again it stops. After some time, again we can say there is a force, and that force is in opposite direction of its motion. That is why it stops. These type of forces are known as frictional forces. If I forward it in forward direction, I move it in forward direction, that is applied between the surface of this book and floor in opposite direction. When I move in this direction, then that frictional force comes in action in the direction opposite to its motion, and that is between this floor and surface of this book. These type of forces are known as frictional forces. Now we will do some activities to show that whether this depends on nature of the surfaces or not. Now we discuss factors affecting friction, and the first factor, that is nature of the surfaces in contact. To clearly understand this reason, we do an activity. Look, this is an instrument that is known as spring balance. If I apply here force, then its reading increases. More force, more reading, more force, more reading. Okay, it means it gives reading of the force. Now we do this activity. Look here. This mass is being pulled by me, and I use here this spring balance to measure the force, and here it gives a reading which is equivalent to 200 grams. Okay, now I change its nature of the surfaces of this mass and this floor. Look, this time I have wrapped this mass in this polythene, and now this time our reading increases slightly. It means we have changed the nature of the surfaces in contact. It means friction depends on nature of the surfaces in contact. We take an inclined plane, and I mark here a line. Now I release this cell from this line, and Here again I mark a line. Okay. Now I have wrapped this cell by a thread. Okay, it means I have changed the nature of the surface. Initially that was this floor and surface of outer surface of this cell. This time this floor and surface of this thread. And we will look the activity. I release from the same height and it covers smaller distance. It means this time the frictional force is greater in comparison to previous situation, because this time the surfaces are, one surface is different from the previous one. These two activities clearly indicates that friction depends on nature of the surfaces in contact. Now we will see the reason of this frictional force. Friction is caused by irregularities on the surfaces in contact. What it means? Child, look here, this is an object and we are considering this surface in our experiment. To consider this surface, you may look at very smooth by your naked eyes, but if we look at by microscope, then there are irregularities on this surface. It means some part up, some down, some up, down. Those are irregularities on this surface. The same for the upper surface of this object. Here again, if we look at this is smooth, maybe smooth. If smooth part of this object, upper part, by microscope, we again look irregularities. And if I place first object on the second object in this manner, then these irregularities interlock in such a manner then that if we apply a force either in this direction or force either in this direction or in this direction, when we apply force in that direction, then due to these irregularities and interlocking, there is a force which is in opposite direction, and that force is called frictional force. So this is the reason. Now we will again discuss one thing on which it depends. Dear children, look here, this is a table and a mass is placed on the top of this table. If I apply an external force in this direction, then definitely frictional force will be in the opposite direction. Now we will check by doing an activity. If I increases mass of this object without changing nature of the surfaces in contact, then frictional force also increases. For that I will place same type of mass on it, and then after by using a spring balance we will look the change in reading of the spring balance. Look here, this time the force is equivalent of 200 grams. Now I increase this mass. Now look here, that is almost force equivalent of 400 grams. In this manner, we have looked that this frictional force also depends on mass of the object, upper object, if we do not change nature of the surfaces in contact. Dear children, our next topic is friction in SSC. It means it is undesirable. But before it, we will see some situations. I am holding this beaker. Okay, it's necessary for me to hold because I may take water from this container. But if its surface is very oily, if I apply oil on this its surface, it means it's very oily. That time it will be very tough to hold it. It means friction is needed. Again, dear children, if an object is moving on another object, it means you are moving on your car or bike. If there is no friction between the tires and the road, then if you apply brake, then it will be not possible to stop the bike. It means that is desirable at that place. Due to the effect of the friction, we can nail on a board. Okay, it means that is again very much needed. If there is no friction, then we cannot write on this board, such as I am drawing this line. There is a friction between this surface and the surface of this chalk. That is why when I rub, some parts of this chalk sticks to the surface of this board. That is due to friction. It means friction is very much needed in various places, but in some places, dear children, it is not desirable. It means it is evil. For that, we do an activity. I rub my hands in such a manner. You also rub. These hands become very hot, and this heat is generated by the frictional force. I applied force, and there is a friction between these two surfaces, and that friction converts my energy in the form of heat. It means it generates a large amount of heat. If there is friction between two surfaces and both surfaces are moving on one another, then that generates heat, and that heat is very harmful for various parts of our machineries, such as you are having a fan, and that fan is having ball bearings. Okay, you have not inserted oil on the bearing for a long time. Okay, when you switch on your fan, then after half an hour, touch its body. After switching off, touch its body. It becomes very hot. That is due to the friction, because friction is there between the surfaces which are moving on one another. It means it is very much undesirable. It is evil in some places. Now we will discuss how it can be reduced or increased. Dear children, now we will see how we can increase or decrease or reduce friction. First of all, look the outer layer of the tires of your bike or your bicycle or motor car. There are these type of structures, these type of bulges on the outer surface of the tires. These are placed so that the friction between this outer surface of the tires and road increases. So these type of things increases the friction. Another thing, dear children, if you see the bottom of your shoe, okay, that time that is also having irregularities. Those irregularities increase friction because that is desired. If there is no friction between the floor and the lower part of your shoes, then it's very slippery for you. It means you cannot move on an oily surface. If oil is spread on the outer surface of the floor, then it will be very tough for you to move on that floor, because that is very slippery, or we can say there is a smaller friction. In these ways we can increase the friction. Now, how to decrease the friction? Next, reducing friction. First example, you can see the game of carom. You use talcum powder to reduce the friction between the coins and floor of the carom. What this powder, talcum powder, do? Okay, look here. This is surface first, as we discussed in previous section. This is second. This time we have used an oil between these two surfaces. It means this time these surfaces are not in very much contact. It means these irregularities are not interlocked. This oil makes a layer between these two, and the molecules of this oil works as small spherical bonds between these two surfaces, and this reduces the amount of friction between these two surfaces. Here you are also looking a diagram. In this diagram you are looking this shoe pad, and this is the interior of the tire ring. When we apply brake, then this shoe pad sticks to this rim, and there are large number of irregularities between these two, and that is why it sticks and slow down your car or bike. It means by increasing irregularities here we can increase the friction, and if there is some place, as we discussed in our previous section, in the ball bearing of your fan, if you use oil, then that becomes smaller, that will generate smaller heat. It means that will become smaller hot in this way. Next, dear children, wheels reduce friction. To look it, let's do an activity. Dear children, you are looking this book on this floor, and if I apply a force, then it moves in the direction of the force. Here I apply force in this direction. The friction between this surface and this surface, that is sliding friction, because one object is sliding on the another object. That time the friction which comes in action is known as sliding friction. Okay, now we will see another activity. I take these pencils and I place this book on it. Now I slide. It's very easy to slide on it. It means this time the friction between these two surfaces, that is rolling friction, because one surface rolls on the another surface. It means rolling friction is much smaller than the sliding friction. This is clear from this activity. To do this in our fan, we use ball bearings. Ball bearings converts. Dear children, there are two types of fans. One are having bushes. In that case, axle slides on the bush. But in another type of fans, we use ball bearings, and at that time axle doesn't slide on the another part, but it rolls on the fixed part of the fan. Dear children, look, this is ball bearing. Okay, this is ball bearing. It converts sliding friction into rolling friction, and rolling friction is much smaller than the sliding friction. Okay, and upper diagram you are looking, that is the interior of your ceiling fan, and lower diagram you are looking, that is ball bearing. Dear children, now our topic is fluid friction. Whether air or water opposes the motion of the object through them. It means liquids and gases both are known as fluids. When an object moves through the fluid, whether that opposes the motion of the objects or not, to do this, we are doing an activity. This is a container having water. This is another container having honey. Now, take the same objects and move this object from this to this direction and feel the efforts used by you. Here again, do the same. You will look this time the efforts used by you are greater. It means here you use more force to move this object with the same speed in comparison to this. In this manner, we can say fluids also exert friction on the objects which move through them. It means when we move in a water tank or when we move in air, every time we experience an opposite force, and that opposite force is known as fluid friction. That is also known as drag. Now, dear children, to minimize, when an aeroplane is moving through the air, flying through the air, that time it also experiences this against force, and that against force converts the maximum energy in the form of heat. So this is the wastage of the energy. So how can we minimize? And to minimize, we draw some diagrams in this manner. Dear children, this fluid friction wastes the energy in the form of heat. To minimize it, we engineers design aeroplanes in such a manner that when it flies through the air, then the air friction is minimum on it. It is designed in such a manner. Submarines are also designed in such a manner that when they move through the water, then the friction, opposing force of water can be minimum. Dear children, this is a bird, this is flying, and it also makes it safe in such a manner that so that this fluid friction become smaller. So these are some examples how to minimize this fluid friction, because it converts our energy in the form of heat. It means that wastes our energy.